Bodacious bucket list trackers. This is an app my students had to build for their second midterm of the semester. It was one of 2 apps that they needed to complete on their own laptops in 2.5 hours. They couldn't use AI, old code, or consult the internet. They could use a single double-sided page of notes with content of their choice, and the reason for that strictness is to help students prepare for code interviews. Now, this is different from many of the other lessons that you'll find in our Zero to Full Stack course playlist. My students have all completed lessons where the concepts are explained. That said, I will explain things briefly, and I'll introduce a few new concepts here as well. Now, also, employers, my students are brilliant. Please reach out to me if you have any jobs or internships, and I'll be sure to pass them on to them. My former students are now engineers at some of the world's leading tech firms, including Apple, and they've built massive startups. Some have gone through Y Combinator. Get in on that talent. With that said, let's get to it. So here's a quick look at our app. Of course, we have this groovy icon, and if we launch the app, we see our launch screen, so the app will be accepted to the App Store. And we've got full CRUD capabilities, so we see a list of all of the bucket list items we've entered. We're reading that saved from the device. We can click on plus. We see a sheet pop up where we can enter a new bucket list item, a title, a note, it's in there. So we have create capabilities. What about update? Let's click on that item again. When we click on completed, we see a date picker is exposed along with the title completed on, so we can set the completed on date. Save, we see it's updated in the list. We've got a segment control up top where we can click to show just the completed items or just the open items, or go back to all. And the last element for full CRUD capabilities is swipe to delete. We can no longer spend euros in London, so we'll delete that. And that's what we'll build. So this app is called BucketList. It's a simple SwiftData app that lets you keep track of goals and accomplishments. At this point in the course, my students have built at least 3 SwiftData apps, so this should be pretty straightforward. We've also got a picker view that's styled as segmented, which will allow the user to show any of the bucket list items that have been completed or that are still open, or look at all the items on the list. And if completed is toggled, you're able to select a completion date, and a date picker shows up. First, we'll create the app name BucketList, and we'll add the icon and launch screen. And I give you the URL where you can download those items. So we'll launch Xcode. We're creating a Swift iOS app. We'll call it BucketList. Make sure Create Git Repository is checked. This is a great app to push to your GitHub portfolio. And let's start in the assets catalog. First, I'll click the app icon, and I've already downloaded the BucketList file, so I'm going to go in there, drag the BucketList icon into the first icon box. Then I'll highlight all 3 launch screen files and drag those into the asset catalog. They're treated as one. If I press return and get in rename mode, I can Command C to copy the launch screen name, then head over to the project file. At the top of the project navigator, click on Info. I'll expand the triangle next to launch screen, and in the UI launch screen line, I'm going to click on the up and down pointing arrows and select image name. Then I'll click in the value cell and Command V to paste in the name of the launch screen, press return, and we've got our icon on launch screen. Question 2, create the goal class. In fact, I even let folks know that this is the class, not a struct. This is going to be the model for the bucket list data. We want to include everything that we need to work with SwiftData. Use the following attributes: title string, notes string, completed bool, and completed on, which is a date which should initialize to the current date. So to add a file, I'll right click in the empty space in the project navigator and select new file from template. This is a Swift file since there are no SwiftUI interface elements in it, and I'm going to call this class. It looks like this was added just below the bucket list, but not inside the bucket list folder, so I'll drag it in there now. And when we start a SwiftData class, it's going to be a model. We say import SwiftData and at model. Then we'll specify the class keyword with goal with a capital G, since this is a type, open and close curlies, and inside we'll offer our properties: var title :string, var notes :string, var completed bool, and var completed on. And we want to specify this as the current date, so we'll say equal capital D date, open and close parens. Now Xcode's letting us know that we need an initializer for this class because we've got 3 properties that were not initialized when we declared them up above. So I'll just start to type in init, and Xcode wants to write the whole initializer for me, so I'll tab over and accept this. Looking good. Next up, in number 3, I'd like you to create a convenience initializer that we can use to create a goal class with no parameters, to create a blank goal with empty strings for the strings plus false for the completed property, and completed on should be the current date as mentioned above. So below the default initializer, I'll type in convenience space init, open and close parens, open and close curlies, start to type in self.init, tab over. For my title, I'll enter an empty string, notes an empty string, and completed, I'll say false. No need to pass in a completed on date because I already initialized the completed on date when I declare it above. Next, we want to add mock data as part of an extension to goal, and we should include the data that I list below in this table. And I also say that for completed on, you should set all the values to the current date. Sorry, I spelled Machu Picchu wrong in the screenshots. And as we create our mock data, my students all knew that there was a recipe that they could follow. And in class, I showed a couple of ways of dealing with main actor. When we work with mock data, I'd mentioned you could put main actor at the top of the class. And I also showed a way that you can put a task with main actor in it inside where the main context is. Now, both of those should work for our app. I'll give you full credit for them, but I also want everybody to know what's considered to be the best Swift version 6 way to deal with main actor, and that's to add at main actor right below the extension just before the preview variable. So without that label, Swift doesn't know which thread it should run on, but main actor here in the preview forces it on the main thread where the UI work is done, and it does this in a way that's not going to impact the rest of the class. Even though the code looks a little gnarly, it should be exactly the same for any mock data that you create in SwiftData. There are just a few items that need to be changed, and those items are underlined in green on this slide. So below the closing curly, I'm going to say extension capital G goal, open and close curly. One thing that would change is instead of goal, it would be the name of whatever class I'm extending if I did this in a different app. And I used one of the older techniques here, but I'll show you the update with a better way to use main actor. What I should really do is put at main actor right in here. That should always be the case. Then I'll have static var preview colon model container open and close curlies. This means I'm creating a variable called preview. It's a calculated property, so it's not storing a value, and it's of type model container. So instead of using the real model container that has the real saved Swift data, instead I'm creating a mock container, so it's not the saved values. These are values that are just going to exist in memory, and I just use them for displaying data in my preview. Nothing changes. It's going to be the same every time it's used. Then down below, I'm going to create a container, I'm going to update the container, and then I'm going to return the container. So I'm going to say let container equals try exclamation point, capital M, capital C, model container, and I want the option with the for and the configurations. The for is the one thing that'll change in new classes. We have the class name, for us it's capital G goal dot self, so that's the blueprint to use for the data that we're saving in this mock model container. And for configurations, we'll say model configuration, and in between parentheses, we'll pass in is stored in memory only and set that to true, because again, it's not saved on disk or on the device, it's just in memory because it's just as bogus data that we're using in the preview. This is a recipe line. The only thing that's going to change is the goal. You'll replace that with whatever new class you're using this in a future app. Now down below, I say task and open and close curlies with at main actor in on the task line. But again, the way we want to do this in the future is to add at main actor right where I'm pointing the arrow in here just after the extension goal and before the preview. And to silence the error above the closing curly for this calculated property, I'm just going to say return container. And in the middle, this is where we set up what's inside the container. But the first setup is going to be the same for any data that we add. It's going to be container.mainContext.insert. We created the container above. It knows it's a goal. So we're going to insert capital G goal, and we get the initializer in here. So for the title, I'm going to put in Dive the Great Barrier Reef. The notes will be need scuba certification first. The completed will be false, and I'll put in a completed on. That's capital D date, open and close parens for the current date. So this line is going to be the same. The only thing that's going to be different is what I put in between the parens for the insert. Since I'm inserting an instance of a goal class, that's why I've got goal with its full initializer in here. Then I'll copy this line, paste it 5 times below, and I'll just copy and paste the different items from the exam. So that's our mock data, but remember, a better way to set this up in the future is not to use the task at main actor in part, but instead put at main actor after the extension and just before you set up the preview variable. Now, I wanted to offer you a little bonus in here because I realized as you were creating this, you might wonder, hey, what if I want to pass in a different date for our mock data? And we didn't cover this in class, but I'll show you how to do this now. We simply create a calendar object, and then we can use that to specify a specific date from date components. And this is how we do it. I'm just going to copy these 3 lines, the line that creates the calendar and 2 lines that create 2 different constants for 2 different dates. I'll paste them in our preview calculated property just below where we create the container property inside here. So the second line creates a date that's called scuba cert completed on. I'm just going to copy this name here. And I'll paste this over the date with parentheses. That'll pass in the completed on as December 25th, 2023. And I'll do the same thing with Great Wall hike completed on, copying that and using it to replace the value for completed on for the hike the Great Wall. That's it. That was not at all required, but it's a new technique for you to know. Up next, do anything necessary to set up the app to work with SwiftData, including any setup so that the app can display the location for the simulator data that can be examined with DB Browser. And we did this several times in class, as well as in one of our online lessons. So we know as part of our recipe for working with SwiftData, after we set up our class, we head over to the app file, which is BucketList app, the first file to execute, and we first got to import SwiftData. Then below the content view here in the window group, we're going to tell our app what our data looks like. So we'll say .modelContainer4. Again, model container is that object that's in charge of performing all the CRUD operations on our data. And here we also pass in that blueprint for what our data is going to look like. So the model container knows how to set up our data. That's just going to be the name of the class, goal.self. And of course, that would change if you create a different app with a different class name. Now, my students also learned to use the free DB Browser app to be able to inspect their data that's being saved in the simulator so they can get a sense of whether or not their data is being saved properly. We're going to do that in an initializer just before the closing curly. We'll say init, open and close parens, open and close curlies, and we'll pass in a print statement because this very long URL, which is essentially a directory path, it's not an internet URL, will print out for us in the console. So we'll say capital URL dot application support directory. Make sure you got support in there because there is an application directory, dot path with the percent encoded set to false. That's it. Next, we rename the container view to BucketList view. That's super simple. We head over to the container view, right-click on container view in our struct definition, and we'll select refactor, rename, and type in BucketList view. Press return, view renamed everywhere in the app. On to question 7, where you should do what's necessary so that the bucket list view looks like the example below. It has a value goals that returns and holds an array of capital G goal values that have been saved using SwiftData, or that shows mock data when displaying results in the preview canvas. It should have a navigation title, bucket list : it should have the plus button in the upper right hand corner, configured to perform a confirmation action to be set up in a later question. It should have a list. The list should contain each goal title in font title 2, and the list style should be as shown. So back in the bucket list view, we're working with SwiftData on this view, so we got to say import SwiftData. And to get all of our SwiftData from our device, we simply say @query var goals is what we're going to call this value, and then in between square brackets, capital G goal. That's going to read in all the values we saved. And while we're at it, my students know that at some point they're going to need a sheet to present the sheet that they add the data into. So we'll create a Boolean value to present the sheet at state private var sheet is presented. We'll set this equal to false initially. And because we're working with SwiftData on this view, we need to set up an environment variable at environment and in between parens /.modelContext. And we'll set this to private var model context. Then let's change our vStack to a navigation stack. And down in the preview, we can set things up so that we can see our mock data. Just below bucket list view, we say .modelContainer, and we're going to pass in capital G goal.preview. We can get that static variable with capital G goal because it's static. Now let's see that data in a list. I'm going to get rid of everything in the navigation stack, and we're going to enter a list, select the option with our data and our raw content. The data is going to be goals, tab over, press return. SwiftData has IDs behind the scenes, so we don't need to add an ID in here. We're going to call each individual goals item a goal. Then inside we'll say text, passing in goal.title, and look at that, we see our preview goals. We'll set this to .font.title2, and we're going to set the .list style down below the closing curly in the list to .plain. We don't need padding down here, so I'm going to delete that. But below the list style, we'll say .navigation title, passing in the string bucket list : Remember, that's got to be inside the navigation stack, not outside it. You know what, while we're at it, why don't we set up our button? So we'll add a .toolbar modifier down here. In between the curlies, we'll add a toolbar item with placement and actions. The placement will be .confirmation action, just as I requested in the question. Press return, and inside we're going to add a button, and the way we'll add it is with title key system image and action. The title key is going to be the string add, although we'll never see that in an iOS app. We can tab over for the system image. It's going to be the string plus in lowercase. Tab over, press return, and the action is going to be sheet is presented dot toggle open and close parens. That will show the sheet when we get ready to add the sheet code. We'll do that later on. For now, let's go back to the exam. And in 8, we want to create a detail view that looks like the one below when viewed from the detail view preview pane. And it has all the components in Title II font, applying horizontal padding to the elements of the view, but not default padding, so nothing below or above. The text views should be goal, colon, and notes, colon, both in bold. We should have text fields below the text views with placeholder text goal and notes respectively. The notes text field should also expand vertically if the note is longer than a single line, and it should also have some bottom padding. There should be a toggle to indicate if the goal was completed. The toggle's title should be completed ? In bold, and that should also have bottom padding. And when the toggle is off, no completed on option should show, but if the toggle is on, then a date picker should show with the title completed on. And the default value should be set for today, but not show an option to select time only date. The completed on title should also be bold. This is what it should look like. So let's get at it. I'll create the detail view below the bucket list view by right-clicking on bucket list view, then selecting new file from template. And since this has got interface elements, it is a SwiftUI view. We'll call this detailview.swift. Since we're working with SwiftData, we got to import SwiftData, and we're going to be passing data over from our bucket list view. So we're going to create an @state var, not private because we want it visible outside of this view, and we'll call that goal, colon, and this is of type capital G goal. Now we get an error down here in the preview, but we know how to fix that. Just backspace over detail view and start to retype it. We see now that detail view wants a goal, so we'll enter a goal with capital G goal. We'll use the initializer that has all of the different options for the parameters in here, and the title will be Fix Healthcare. The note will be pretty hard, but it will be awesome when done. Completed will be false, and completed on will be date open and close parens. Now this is going to be data that's just used for the preview, so below this we'll say .model container with for and in memory. The for is going to be capital G goal.self. That's what the data looks like, and in memory will be true. Now we'll also want 2 environment variables, one that's at environment between parens \model context var model context. The model context acts as a temporary holding space before we save stuff out to the model container, and we need that on any view where we do CRUD functions in SwiftData. And the other for dismiss, at environment between parens \dismiss private var dismiss. And we can make the model context private as well. Now, because SwiftData remembers changes to any of its values, we're going to create local values that we can use to store the user-entered data. And then we can cancel without any changes to our SwiftData if we want to, or we can save data by passing these local values back into our goal value. So let's create these local values that we're going to use in our interface objects. We'll say @state private var title equals empty string, @state private var notes equals empty string, @state private var completed equals false, and @state private var date equals capital D date open and close parens. And then we can work on the user interface. Let's get rid of everything that's inside the body and start with vstack. And we want to use the alignment property in here. And after the colon, dot leading, so everything is aligned left. And in between the curlies, we'll add text, passing in the string goal, colon, and modify this with dot bold, open and close parens. Also set down below the vstack, dot padding, dot horizontal. And why don't we set the font for everything inside with dot font, dot title 2. Now this text view will push over to the left as soon as we enter a text field, which is going to take up the whole width. But first, let's set up our onAppear, where we take the properties that are in the goal variable that we passed over from our bucket list view, and we put them in our local variable. So below font title 2, we'll say dot onAppear, open and close parens. So when this view appears, what we'll do is we'll say title equals goal.title, notes equals goal.notes, completed equals goal.completed, and date equals goal.completed on. And yeah, we shouldn't be calling this variable date up here. Why don't we make sure that that's called completed on as well? It doesn't matter technically, but we should be consistent. Then below the text field, we'll pass in a text field, and our placeholder text will be the string goal, and the text will be $title. Remember, this is binding. And below this, we'll set our text field style to .rounded border. Then I'll copy the text and text field views, paste them down below, change goal to notes, Change the text field so its placeholder is notes and the text is $notes, and we'll add a spacer below. Now also remember we said that the text view for notes should expand vertically, so we'll add one more parameter after notes. We'll say comma axis colon, and that's going to be dot vertical. Then below this we'll add our toggle with the is on option. The text is completed question mark, and is on is going to be Boolean completed. We'll add modifiers for bold and padding with just dot bottom. And we've got to make sure that we put our $sign in front of completed because it's binding. Next up is the date picker. We want the option with the title key and the selected date and the displayed components. The title is completed on. The selection is going to be $sign completed on. Remember, that's a date value. And for our displayed component, type dot in here. You get a bunch of different options, and date will limit our display to show just the date. We can see over at the right, the selection for time is now eliminated. We'll add a bold modifier below this, and remember, we want to have the completed on date picker show when completed is true, but hidden when completed is false. So we'll do that by wrapping our date picker in a conditional. I'll highlight this and type an open curly. It wraps this in closing curly, and before the open curly, I'll just say if completed. And look at this, it's working great. Now let's focus on our toolbar, and now for the toolbar, we can use that below the V stack because we're already in a navigation stack from the prior view. And since we're going to have cancel and save buttons here, we should say navigation back bar button hidden. That gets rid of left pointing chevron. We want to get rid of that, and that's why testing your app is important because it's easy to forget. You wouldn't notice that on the detail view because that button doesn't show up unless you navigate from the button list view. And we'll add a toolbar modifier with toolbar placement. That's going to be cancellation action for our cancel button. We'll select the option with the button and the system image and action. The button title is going to be cancel, although we're not going to see it in iOS. The system image is a string X mark, and our action press return is going to be dismiss open and close parens. We can't see this, and we know why. Our preview is not wrapped in a navigation stack. So I'm going to highlight the detail view down here, type an open curly so it's enclosed in curlies, and put the word navigation stack in front of it. Now I see my cancel button on the left in the groovy liquid glass style, and I can add another toolbar item inside of our toolbar. The placement here is going to be dot confirmation action. The button's going to be the same type with the title, the system image, and the action. The title is going to be saved. The system image here is going to be check mark, all one word, all lowercase. Tab over, press return on the action. We're going to put a dismiss in here, but above this, this is what we'll do that's going to be opposite of the on appear. So remember, in the on appear, we took all of the properties of the value that we passed over, goal, and we put them in local values. Now we take those local values and we put them back into the property for goal. We do that because the default with SwiftData is for the values to linger around in any SwiftData properties that are changed. So this handoff handback eliminates that. Goal.title equals title, goal.notes equals notes, goal.completed equals completed, goal.completed on equals completed on, and now we're ready to save. We refer to our model context environment variable, that's the stuff that holds our changes in memory, and we say .insert passing in goal. And that's all we need to do to either insert or update data in SwiftData. Totally cool. Now these next lines are not required, but they're a good thing to do in the simulator because the simulator crash doesn't push data out to SwiftData, whereas on a device it will. So this is just for the simulator. It's not necessary, but it'll make sure that data saves if you have an odd crash at some point. Since I have faced this in more advanced work, I think it's a good idea to get into this habit. So we'll just say guard let underscore equals try question mark, model context dot save, open and close parens, else, curlies, return, and above that I'll just say print, angry emoji, error, save on detail view did not work. That's it for our detail view, and once again, our recipe that we learned in class and in our example is followed with just the changes for our user interface and the properties and variables that are associated with this class. So I'll hop over to button list view, and in question 11 we say that now that we have a detail view, return to the bucket list view and update it so that if an item in the list is tapped, that item will be passed to the detail view for editing. The detail view should populate with the data of the item passed, and I show you how they should work in the illustrations below. So just inside the list, we're going to add our navigation link with our destination and label. Press return for trailing closures. And the destination is going to be detail view. It wants a goal, so we pass in lowercase g goal. And the label is going to be the text with its modifier that we have down here, so we'll cut it out and paste it in the label. So now we can try this out. It should update. I'll click on Safari in Kenya, add a little bit more to the title, click on the Save button. We see it's updated. If I click back on it, we can see it's passed over with the edited value in there. Clicking completed shows the completed on date picker. Once again, save works. It keeps the completed and completed on change. And if I delete some of the title value and click on cancel, it's not saved. So my pass back and forth of the goal properties works great. We don't pass those properties in if we click on the cancel button, so we're looking good. Now on to question 12. Here in the bucket list view, we're just going to follow our recipe to add a record using a sheet. So when the plus button is tapped, we want to add a new goal to the bucket list view. We want to open a sheet with the default values using the convenience initializer we created earlier, and the images below show what this work should look like with values. So we'll head to the end of the navigation stack, and we'll add a dot sheet selecting is presented with content. Remember, earlier in the exercise, we added our Boolean value, $sheet is presented. If you didn't create that, you want to create it now and add it. Then tab over, press return on content. We already toggled our sheet is presented inside of the button action, so we're going to show the sheet. The sheet action is going to present the detail view. Remember, we pass in a goal, and this is going to be a new goal, so this is where we use that convenience initializer. We say goal with a capital G, but nothing in between the parentheses. Let's try it out, and oh, we're not seeing our toolbar. How come? Because we need to wrap the detail view in a navigation stack. Now it works. Nice. Let's add some data, finish this exam with a note, hopefully I did well. Let's click on completed. The date picker shows up. Exam day was on the 17th. Save, it's there. Go back. Everything is as saved. Looking good. We're on to question 13. And that's add swipe to delete, so that if you swipe left on a goal, you'll be able to delete it. And this should look as shown below, which is consistent with iOS 26. So you should know we've got the trash icon in there, the destructive view that shows us in red, and the word delete is not in the button. Let's build. Now I showed you a couple ways to implement this. We're going to implement it with the swipe actions modifier, and we want that to be inside the list goal. We want the swipe action to be detected when you swipe left on a navigation link. So just before the second closure in the navigation link, below the labels, we'll say .swipe actions. Press return for trailing closure, and for our button, we'll add the one with title key system image role in action. Always remember, if you can't see things in code completion, you can just drag the right side of the code completion box to see more text. I don't want any text showing up with the button, so I'm going to enter an empty string there. The system image is going to be the string trash, all lowercase. The role is going to be .destructive. Tab over and press return on action, and all we need to do is refer to our model context, which has our data changes in memory, and say .delete. It wants to pass in the model in here. That's just the data we want to delete, which is going to be lowercase g goal. Now again, this next part is optional, but it just helps make sure that you don't lose any data. If you have one of those weird crashes in the simulator, it's guard let _ equals try question mark model context dot save open and close parens, else open and close curly's return. And above the return, print angry emoji error, save after .delete did not work. And let's get old Dora here and do the swiper swiping. I'll do it on the Great Wall. I can see we have this icon just as we'd like. It's in red. It doesn't have the word delete underneath. Click on that little trash can, and it evaporates. Kablam! If we did add delete between the double quotes up here, it would show up. That's not what we wanted. That's why we got an empty string in here for the button title. Getting close to being done, let's head over to question 14, where we create an enum named S segments. Remember, this is a type with 3 options, all completed and open, and these cases should all have raw values of strings, and those are the same name but with capitalized, all completed and open. And I'm not sure why we got one of the mysterious preview crashes in here, but we'll just reload and everything's back to normal. And you could put this enum anywhere, including in its own separate file, but since we're only going to use this inside of the struct, it makes sense to put it inside the bucket list view struct. So just inside the open curly up here, I'll say enum S segments, because it is a type, colon, string comma case iterable. This will allow us to set a raw value of a string, and case iterable will allow us to go through all of the elements of the enum. That's useful if we want to use them in a for each, which we will. Then we'll say open curlies. And inside we'll add our 3 cases, all equals, in quotes, capital A, all, case completed equals, in quotes, capital C completed, case open equals, in quotes, capital O open. Enum done. Let's head back over to the test for question number 15. Show the completed status and add a filtering picker. So we want to modify the line in each list goal so that it shows a symbol to the left of each goal. And if a goal is not completed, it should show the symbol square. Otherwise, it should show checkmark.square. Like the goal's title, the symbol should also be in Title II font. And we also want to add a picker with a style segmented. The picker goes above the list, not inside the list. It should show the 3 elements in the segmented enum that you created above. The current value for the picker should be saved in a variable named selected segment. And initially, set the selected segment to the all case. See the example below for what the app should now look like. So let's head over and build this. So as our navigation link label, I want our title and our symbol side by side. That implies that we got to put that in an H stack. Then I'll leave the font modifier so it modifies the H stack, but I'm going to cut out the text with goal title, paste it in the H stack, and above that I'll say image with the system name. And remember, we want this system name to show up conditionally as a check mark if the goal is completed, as a square if it's not. So we'll say goal.completed, use the ternary operator with a question mark. We'll have a string in here if it's true, colon, string in here if it's false. If it's false, we'll just add square, but if it's true, we'll say checkmark.square. And look at that, home skillets. Over here on the right-hand side, we've got either that blank square or the checkmark square showing up if it's not completed or completed. Cool. Now let us add the picker. Remember, we're going to need a variable to hold the selection, so we'll add a new variable up here with that state private var. I said that we should call this selected segment, and I said that we should set this equal to all, so we can set this equal to capital S segments.all, or we could say colon capital S segments equals .all. Either one works. And then above the list in the navigation stack, we're going to select a picker view, which has got a title, selection, and content. The title we don't want to show up because it's going to be that segmented style, so we'll put an empty string in here. The selection is going to be $selected segment, then press return for trailing closure. Here's where we show all the elements of our segmented enum, so we'll say for each selecting the option with data, we need an ID since we're not identifiable, and content, data is capital S segments dot all cases, so we iterate through all of them. Tab over to ID, which is \self, tab over, press return. On our content, the name of each individual segment's element is going to be segment. Then inside here, we'll just say text segment.raw value, but this shows us a menu picker by default. But in class, we showed you how to fix this. We just set our picker style to .segmented, and look at this. We can clickety-click on any of the 3 options here, looking magnificent. Back over to our last question, question 16. Normally this would be more involved, but I pretty much give you the answer in here. I say filter using a computed property. So create a computed property named filtered goals that should return data stored in SwiftData. The array goals value filtered according to the following conditions. That implies a switch case, and here are 3 cases. If selected segment is all, then return goals with a lowercase g. If selected segment is completed, then return goals.filtered, and in between curlies, $0.completed. This returns just the completed entries in the database. And if the selected segment is open, return goals.filter. And this was a big hint, essentially gave you the line that you need. In between curlies, exclamation point, $0.completed. The exclamation point, as you know, is not. That would be the same as $0.completed double equals false. Then I say if you successfully create the computed property above, then filtered goals will always have the data that should be shown depending on which segment has been selected in the segmented control picker view. So replace the goals variable in your list with filtered goals, that computed property, and if properly implemented like magic, you should see that the values in your picker view styled as the segmented control filtering results depending on which segment in the picker is selected as shown below. Look at that awesomeness, and when we complete this, we are done. So let's get at it. So we'll create our computed property up with our other properties. I'll put mine right underneath the enum. I'll say var, remember we call this filtered goals, colon, and what are we returning? In square brackets, an array of capital G goals, open and close curly. Again, this is the same type that we have with our query variable goals, and inside this we want to switch case, and if I say switch, selected segment, and tab over, Xcode completes all three cases. Because we only have cases, they're defined in an enum. Case.all : is going to have the code simply to return goals, so we have no change over query. So what we do is we just take the goals that we got via query and we pass that back into filtered goals. But for the .completed case, we're going to return goals.filter, and in between the curlies, $0.0.completed. We covered our filter in class when we were covering functional programming. And if we have the case.open, we're going to say return.goalsFiltered, and this is going to be exclamation point $0.0.completed, which is the same as $completed double equals false. That exclamation point is just the not. It negates true to false and false to true. And now that we've got this, well, I mentioned that you just replace goals in your list with the new filtered goals computed property. That's it. Let's try out these segments. We show all by default. How about completed? Just those two with the check. How about open? Only those without the check. Back to all ultra outstanding. You can add your goal is complete exam part 1. Your note hopefully is I aced it. That is completed on the 17th. Our segments are working. Again, swipe to delete. We've got full CRUD in a SwiftData application with filtering. Oh yeah, and one more thing to do. Let's build and run so we can see this in the simulator. Hammer time. We got that nice launch screen. Fabulous. I'd already run this in the SimCity, so that's why I've got some data that I pre-entered in here. You probably don't have anything in here, but just to show you everything's working fine, we can click on Dive the Great Barrier Reef and say we completed that in some previous year. Save it. We've got it in our list. Why don't we swipe left to see if we can delete? We can. Hiking the Great Wall is no longer there. We can check our filter buttons, just the completed ones, just the open one. All works great. What happens if we click on the home button? We see our fabulous icon. And just to remind you, if you two-finger click on an icon, you can delete it. That also deletes your data. So if we run again, we get a completely empty app. None of our data is there because we just deleted it. The data lives with the app on a particular device, or a particular device that's simulated with a particular operating system in the simulator. But you can continue to add and manipulate data with your CRUD features. The app is working wonderfully. Hopefully you did well, and if not, hopefully the explanation was useful, and if not, for my in-person students, please see me with any questions you have. In the playlist, you can find the second exam students had to complete as part of this second midterm of the semester. You can check that out if you want to, and always continue to hack.